Hello! In this video, we're going to see how we can create customized posts to give our brand greater visibility through social media publications. This workflow is very simple. What it does is search for news about the topic we specify, create a summary of that news, generate a headline, a link, an attractive image, and publish it on different social networks. The important thing about all this is that the news search and content generation are completely automated. Let's take a look at the workflow as a whole. First, we have the launcher part. This workflow runs every X amount of time. The workflow searches for news about the topic we have specified. We use a Google Sheet as a control method, meaning that every time we generate a news item, we can keep track of the content we are creating. We have a second AI agent whose job is to generate the images. And at the final stage of the workflow, we handle distribution across different social networks. In this case, we make a post on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. We can add more or fewer networks here. Since we are working with text resources and images, we don't use channels like YouTube or TikTok, nor do we create animated reels on Instagram. It could be done as well. Instead of generating an image, what we can do is generate a video. Let's take a closer look at how this agent works. First of all, let's say the key element is the prompt. In this prompt, we are defining what we want our system to do. In this case, we are telling it that we want it to generate a post related to AI topics, and here we specify the instructions we want that content search to follow. Let's say we're looking for news that has viral potential, that is disruptive, that shows technological reach, or that involves some controversy. Why do we do this? Because that's what generates the most virality. We also define the output format. In this case, since we want text-based posts, we have to define a title, a description, the tone we're going to use, some hashtags, which are good for indexing, right? And also a link to the source of the content that we are going to create. And finally, we also say thank you. The time frame in which we want it to search for news. In this case, we're telling it to look for news from the last 7 days from the current date. What's interesting is that all of this is defined textually. Once we have the AI agent defined, we'll see that the searches will be done through Perplexity. Perplexity is an AI search engine that is really powerful. The good thing is that through the prompt, we tell it what we want to search for. We also have a Think Tool module, which allows us to do deeper thinking about what we are executing. We're telling it to reflect more deeply on the topics we want it to analyze in order to generate the news. And here we generate what would be the output format. In this case, as we mentioned, since we want a textual format, we take a title, a description, a hashtag, and the URL of that resource. If we had wanted, we could also have taken an image resource associated with that news item. In our case, what we're going to do is generate the image ourselves. But here, we can define whatever structure we want. And here, it's also important to note, we're going to specify which model we want to use to generate that content. In this case, we're using the GPT 4.1 model for cost reasons. If we generate a lot of news using a simpler model that still has good quality, we can create content at a much more affordable cost. Once people have started through the timer, it searches for news using Perplexity, creates a deep reasoning, generates the content we want to create with the structure we've defined, and moves it to the next step. The next step, I like to save the content in a Google Sheet. What is this for? Well, it's to have a track record of what we're doing, right? So we don't repeat news, so the content is truly more distinctive, and also, why not? To have control. I want to know which news I'm publishing, and I don't want to have to go to each social network to keep track, okay? As for the image, what we do is simply use a very similar model. In this case, we're using GPT 4.0, alright? And here, we're defining the prompt for what we want it to do. Using the content we're providing, a title, a description, hashtags, and the URL, we're going to ask it to generate the image. This brings us to the final step of the process. Once we've generated the image, here we make a call to what would be our model to create the image, and we're going to specify that it outputs it in a certain format. And what we have to do now is simply publish it on the different social networks. And once we've made that post, we'll mark it as published in the Excel sheet. Here, we're using a post to publish on the different networks. The good thing about AppPost is that publishing is as simple as telling it, hey, the network I want to post on, I add the content, the title, the description, the URL, or whatever I need, and it gets published on the different networks. For example, here we have a news item. I simply added the description, the headline, the link, and this would be the image that is being generated for us automatically. If we don't want to use AppPost because it's a paid service, we can create our own publishing service. In this case, I'm showing you the same thing that I implemented to make posts on LinkedIn. What's the problem? The problem is that to make posts on each of the social networks, many of them will require us to create an application associated with the page or with our profile. They'll ask us to generate a key in order to make the post, and this adds complexity. It's not the same. Having to create 4 nodes is different from simply dragging one of the two to make a post on LinkedIn. In our case, what LinkedIn does is, first, we have to register what we want to upload. We have to download the image because the image is published on LinkedIn. It doesn't want us to have linked images. We upload the image, and once the image is uploaded, what we do is upload the text content and the link as well, and then we publish it to our post. In this case, what I told it to do is to publish directly to what would be my personal profile. And here, once we've finished, we also create what would be the Excel sheet to indicate that it's done. This way, we have control and know that we've published that content. These two systems are exactly the same. What is my personal experience? Well, my personal experience is that unless you have to publish a lot of content, it's more convenient to use a node that's already pre-configured. This is a paid node. If I'm not mistaken, I think the service costs about 19 euros. The company is a Spanish company. Honestly, it's very, very good. The integration is super simple, and it really streamlines the process for us. What if we don't want to pay? Nothing happens. We can create this flow ourselves and implement it. We can even create our own nodes that have all this functionality. Alright? The only drawback is that we'll have to go to each social network and create our own application to make the posts. But as you can see, the way it works is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is that instead of having a single node, I'll have to have more nodes to make posts on each of the social networks. We can package this. There's no need to have all 4 nodes here. It's just a way to simplify or speed up the process. And another advantage of using specialized nodes is that when LinkedIn, every so often, granted it happens very rarely, but it does happen, changes the way it implements things, changes its API, we don't need to do all that adaptation ourselves. The node can be updated automatically and will perform this function. So that's basically how publishing works. Remember that here what we're doing is telling it which news we want it to look for, but we can also use news from our own blog. For example, we have variations. What this does is, we're using the news that we publish on our blog posts, right? So that it generates content and publishes it on social media. It's just another way to repurpose content. And remember, here we're generating images, okay? With text, but we could generate videos, right? We could make podcasts or whatever we want. All right? So that's it for publishing and distributing news through social media with automatic creation. If you want more automation, I would recommend visiting our page where we're posting all this content, which is SketchUp. Here we're creating automated agents to handle distribution and lead generation, to reach leads, create automation content, and generate content that gets indexed both on Google and the main LLM engines, which will generate traffic for us or allow us to verify the content. Content verification is automatically distributed between what would be scaling and what would be email verification. Here you have all our verification services, which are honestly very, very powerful. And with this, what we do is create a workflow to automate our entire process. All the tasks that we do manually can be automated through a workflow. Then there's a third aspect, which is to say this makes sense when our workflow is very, very unusual. I mean, when we generate a news story, this isn't going to change. It's always going to be the same. First, we look for news, generate a summary. From that summary, we create the image, and then we publish that image. This is straightforward and by the book. But there are other types of agents that we need to adapt automatically, and these are the new agents enabled by tools like Anthropic's Cloud, or even OpenAI, or various other systems, which adapt themselves to our needs. But we'll cover all of this in another video. Alright, I hope you enjoyed it and see you soon.